Hello, I am Annie Olson, but I was born and my mom called me Pamela, but I'm much more an Annie. So what before you are some shells I've made, and this is kind of my introduction to what's been going through my life for almost 70 years. There's going to be a lot of silence here. I've done this performance many, many times, but always with people. And when you've got people smiling back at you and giving you feedback. So I'm going to just pretend that you're there and you're hearing me and giving me smiles and all that stuff. I am 78 years old, and I came in here to this studio. I am a Herrick Library, and they've got this beautiful program of being able to film stories and all sorts of things for people like me. I grew up in Holland, and this library has been here for a long time. Our first library was in the city hall a long time ago, and I was so scared I didn't even know how to ask the librarian how to find a book. And now I'm doing this. So before I really begin, this is March 10th, 2022. We're in the midst of all of this stuff going on with Russia invading Ukraine and with climate change, and we can't avoid that being in our minds as I'm filming this. If I would have to say, the goal of my whole life has been about building community. So you see this little snail family here, and here's a set of 3, and here's a bowl of a whole bunch, and if you'll notice, they're all different colors and combined colors. So over, I don't know how many times we're going to do this, but I'm going to take you through what I tell myself is the Guiltless Shells story. So I just wanted you to start with seeing this. This one here is where I took the clay and I just pulled it out in the spiral. So my website is called The Essence of the Spiral, because this is much more about the spiral than it is seashells. So I don't know who's going to watch this, lots of people. But just south of Holland is a town called Saugatuck. And Saugatuck is very close to where my grandpa and grandma grew up, and my mom. But there were native people here before we came. And I just want to recognize the native people that lived here and other native people around this country. So one of the things I'm going to read is just a very short statement from Black Elk Speaks. And I saw that the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy. My goodness, it seems like yesterday. In October of 1987, by the way, I need to tell you, I married an American Indian from Alaska, a full-blood. He was going to high school and college here, and we met at the local airport where we were both taking flying lessons. And I went up to Alaska to live, which felt very at home. But in all that time, I was very much about collecting shells and not worrying that I killed an animal for a shell. And in '87, I read Black Elk's words, and it gave me this epiphany that it was very wrong to kill an animal for its shell. So like any good shell collector, I took this negative thing I'd done and tried to turn it into something positive. So I had all this understanding about shells. Now, before I do it, I want you to just think in your mind how long it would take me to make one of these shells. It should take a long time. And I sure wish there was a real audience here. Now there is, Dan is here and Andre is here. But remember, I'm as shy as my shells. And see, it doesn't take as long as you think. In fact, one of the things that I realized, sometimes we make things so complicated. And very gently we have our shell. Now, a little while ago, when we were setting up for this with Dan and Andre, Andre had never seen me do the shells. I don't know if Dan has seen you. Did you? I guess Dan had seen. So I asked them, so these are the colors, and Andre actually made his first shell. Now, as I said in the beginning, community is what I'm all about. If I had to think about what defines me, it's got to be community. So keep that in mind. So let's go back in time. I'm a little girl growing up here, an only child. My mother's an only child. And my grandma had gone to Chicago when she was a kid and worked for a doctor. And her doctor got her to think way outside the box. So she came back here to this conservative town and really struggled. So when I was about 4, she took us down to Fort Myers Beach, Florida. And we stayed at the Rancho Del Mar, and they had a tiny little pool I could swim in, and they had peacocks, and they had very, very naughty grass. The grass was as hard as those shells, and it hurt my feet. But we went down to the beach, and I was not interested in the beach, but I was interested in what was in the water. And my mom took me down to the water, and she showed me this animal that could crawl back into its shell. And it was love at first sight. I wanted to be a snail, because I was one of those kids that really did hide behind my mom's skirts, literally. And that was back when women wore skirts. Don't wear them very much anymore. And when I went to school, we had to wear skirts too, except on Friday. So my mom really loved chickens and all things biology. And so what she did is she introduced me to how to collect these shells. So we would go in the seagrass beds and get snails. And then unfortunately, we would go back to the hotel or the motel, and they would boil them, and we'd take the animal out. And I was little, I thought this is the way you did it. So for most of my life, this is what I did. Whenever I got a chance, we'd go down to Florida where I'd buy shells. Oh my goodness. And I tell you, one of the things I realized with this, I'm going to tell you links. One of the things, you pick out and go to, you put in Shell Factory, Fort Myers, and you will find this enormously large factory. The Shell Factory. Oh, this is where I got all my shells. I was in heaven. I just love that store. And now I go back there and I am just appalled that I loved it. And this is one thing that you'll realize is that around the world, collecting shells and selling them just to decorate things is just a things that everybody does. Nobody thinks about it. Well, I was telling you about Saugatuck and performances. In 2005, I did this for about, well, probably, I don't know how many times. It must have been 14, 16 times, or weekends. My husband and I would go down there. A store called Above and Beyond. It allowed me to set up on their property and set up every weekend and sell. But beyond selling, it was just so lovely just to be there with all the people. I think that's why, one of these times, maybe what we'll do is we'll bring in somebody and I'll actually do it with them. Get some kids. So every week I'm going to come in, I'll bring in different shells, actually tell you a lot more of the story, not just of the shells, but of my whole life. And I'm going to use my art to be able to do that. I am 78. I'm a full-time caregiver now for about 10, 11 years now for my husband. So got a very busy life. And this is going to be so lovely for me to do. So this is, like I said, just a kind of an introduction for me to get my feet wet. Very much I was going to say for my grandchildren. I have 7 grandchildren, and my husband has 4 grandchildren. So there's a lot, and I have 3 children, and there's 2 great-grandchildren. There's Lorna and Liam. And so this is kind of my legacy to my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. They need to hear the story. I don't think any of us own anything. We're loaned it. And this story doesn't belong to me. It came through me. And maybe as I'm talking, you're kind of relating to your own life too. One thing that's real popular now are personality tests. And mine, I guess I've been nicknamed my personality has been nicknamed the mystic. And we're kind of rare. And we're the ones that like things quiet. We think in big pictures. And so we don't fit very well in our American society very well because it's so busy. In fact, driving over here today, there was somebody on the road coming over there, and he just insisted on getting in my lane and going very fast and zipping around. And I'm sure he's got a different personality than mine. So let's go back to how these really happened. But before I do that, I need to introduce you to my companion. My companion is my polymer clay. Polymer clay came out in, I guess, the 70s in America, but I think it was during the Second World War. It was invented off of chemistry. And by the way, my dad was a chemist, and actually a color chemist, so having all this color is kind of like having my dad here. This was a woman apparently that was working on making doll heads, and they used to make them out of porcelain, and she couldn't get any porcelain, so she invented this clay. Now, as a kid, I had modeling clay, and it felt like this, very soft, and as I got older, as an adult, I wish that there was a clay I could preserve, but I couldn't. See, I'm before Play-Doh. And I went in a Ben Franklin craft store in Kent, Washington with my father-in-law, Ish, and here was this box of white clay, and it said you could bake it in the oven, and I was thrilled because it felt like my modeling clay, but I could preserve it. Well, that was way before I even thought about making shells. So what happened is that in '87, when I quit collecting and wouldn't buy a live collected shell, I had this nudge, and a lot of the things that happen to a lot of us, it's almost as if our interior person is all ready to tell us something, but tells us in bits and pieces. So here was this nudge. Why don't you try and make a long spiraled seashell? And that's what this is kind of reminiscent of. So that was very much on my mind. So it was the middle of winter. I think it was 1991. And I rolled this clay out. I made this really perfect cone and held it up and very crudely made my first spiraled shell. Now, I wish I had that first shell, but I didn't know it was going to turn into being such a broad story with so many things to it. But like a violinist, it was very squeaky, hurt my ears, at least the ears of my eyes, but I didn't stop. I kept going and going and going until I got it better. But one of the problems was I didn't know how to put the color in. Now, I told you I collected shells, and I knew them pretty well. I didn't think about how a real snail puts color on its shell. By the way, I did bring some water. Now, they're watching this video. I want you to be aware that I'm trying to make it more like live, and partly for myself too. You know, when people get on stage and they perform, it's a funny thing. They also want to see what they're doing. Okay, now remember I said to you I wanted to get a perfect cone. So I kept rolling this like this. And I kept putting them together. And it just just didn't look right. But I didn't know what to do, and that went on for almost 10 years. Well, this is when life really got interesting for me. One day, and I would say it's probably that subconscious part, rolled it that way. And I instantly knew this is how a real snail puts embellishments and color on its shell, in the spiral. So this is why my website is Essence of the Spiral. I had no idea how much wisdom I would gain from making the spiral. I should have kept that sloppy looking one there. And when I did this is January of 2001. And I was blown away. My husband was at work. I made a whole bunch of shells. I got a beautiful bowl from Bibles from Mexico, and I put them in this bowl, and I looked at them with a magnifying glass. And when I did, it was like they look real. Shock doesn't say it. I have been acquainted with shells since I was 6 or 7. That I could take clay and make them look real. It just absolutely blew me away. It's important to say why I tried to make that shell, that first one. Since I had quit, I still wanted shells. I still wanted the form. And to be able to make them, no, just was beyond for me. So this is January of 2001. I had kept up with Florida. I had kept up with Sanibel. I kept up with it. In 1995, a museum went in, a shell museum. Raymond Burr of Perry Mason fame was an avid shell collector. He provided a lot of money to build it. And I also knew that there was a shell fair. They have it in March, the end of February, the first part of March. And that big shell fair, and you don't sell. One half, I would say, is over here. And it's all decorative shells. And over here is all the science shells. And in between is the lobby. Well, I called up to be in it, and they reluctantly said, well, we don't let any non-shells in the show. But I said, they look so real. So they put me in the artistic one. And here was the science side. And I was like a 5-year-old when I got on that airplane with this enormous, let's see if we can see it here. This is my display in the show. Somebody gave me this lovely case. I wrapped it up in towels and carried it onto the airplane in one of those bags that boys used to deliver newspapers. Because I was also had delivered a lot of newspapers. I must have looked really strange getting on that airplane. And it was a beautiful flight down once we hit the panhandle of Florida. It was clouds all the way. It was like 3 in the afternoon. And then the clouds broke, and the pilot took us and I was on the right-hand side, so we could see the whole coastline. It was just marvelous, except for all of the development. And the seagrass beds were gone. But finally set my display up, and then the next day we had the awards dinner that was lovely. And after the awards dinner, I found out that I got second place, but I found out that the judge thought they were real shells that I had painted. So it seems like that's a good place to end, because that was such a shock to see that. So I'm going to close with this very kind of a short one, and we've gotten started. And hopefully next week or next time we start filming, I will have it a little bit better. And by the way, I'm going to read this quote. It is not the form that dictates the color, but the color that brings out the form. And remember I showed you how I made that first one. It was once I really started to be able to do the color right that my forms began to mature. So I thank you for listening, and we will be back together next time.